There was an episode of American Dad which Stan was traumatized, so he created a miniature model world, shrunk himself down so he would live in the perfect, cute little ideal world. But still, disaster found him, even in an environment of his own creation. His wife Francine told him, no matter what, bad things would happen. He could not stop it, but he could control his reaction to the aftermath. That's basically this Mel Robbins book, but told with more funny, entertaining animation. If that was too complicated for you to understand, well, this parody from The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody can also summarize the book pretty well.
You can conceive, you can believe, and then you can achieve.
I can achieve, and I still might Eve.
Before I go on to talk about the book, I want to talk about self-help and content creation influencers. The self-help industry hit a wall in 2020 during the pandemic. Self-help only works if the problem starts with you, and that's a take from a podcast, If Books Could Kill. I can't claim credit for that. And this is often why self-help authors present the world in a very superficial, condensed way, which the problems can never be too severe because they can't admit that certain things are out of one person's control. And during the pandemic, a lot of people had no control over most of the tragedies going on in their lives. Self-help gurus' business model fell apart, starting with Rachel Hollis and Toiletgate. If you know the scandal, you know the scandal. Other self-help personalities who lost their notoriety and gained infamy were Rachel Hollis's late ex-husband Dave Hollis, Marie Forleo, and Jay Shetty, and so on. But recently, self-help has made a resurgence, actually. Why? I have my theories. As we all know, for another example, TikTok boosted the book industry immensely and is really a big dictator in what becomes successful. The concept of self-help and motivational speaking also adapted to social media pretty well, and now has a new platform for it to stand on. Essentially, self-help motivational gurus learned from romantasy. And definitely an example of this is Mel Robbins. No relation to the other motivational speaker, Tony Robbins. Mel Robbins' new book, The Let Them Theory, has rocketed to a new level of stardom. She herself also has a new wave of fame. Her podcast is doing serious numbers, surpassing Joe Rogan. But why? When many gurus were getting into scandals because, well, a lot of people were calling them out, saying that their advice that sometimes could cost a lot to receive was just useless and that they were just terrible people, Mel Robbins dodged a lot of the skepticism. She did get a good amount of it, but it didn't really impact her. There was a lot of inquiries into, well, her inconsistent backstory, some grifting-like business models, but for the most part, she really managed to get out unscathed. I would say people like Mel Robbins managed to keep a clean image, mostly because, well, she had the same really, nonsense advice and insight that got others canceled. She kind of positioned her, work to be more for people aspiring to severe success. So more like the business community, though, I mean, she's famous because people from all walks of life like her. But that's generally where she acts as if her, wisdom applies to. And because you could say it's for a more targeted kind of person, then you can't be too upset if other types of people just don't jive with it or something like that. I mean, Mel was more corporate, which means she was more clean. Now, with her new book, The Let Them Theory, and what Let Them Theory is, it really broke a glass ceiling in popularity. And I don't follow her fans, I don't follow people who are into this stuff, and it is pure circles, because even people who snark on life coaching in the self-help community have expressed a liking for this book. Why? Oh, before I go into that, I just want to say that, again, a lot of these books are really just advertisements for the person's business, and these self-help gurus will do anything to get easy fame. Even look right now at the New York Times bestseller list specifically for the category of self-improvement. A ton of these books have the dagger on them, which means they were bulk purchased, which means likely there was sale manipulation just to get the person on the New York Times bestseller list. They have something to add to their resume. Like, I did a keynote speech for this big company, that kind of thing. But so see how scammy you can kind of get there? Okay, but now back to Mel Robbins. The let them theory is about distancing yourself from toxicity and just letting people do their thing without worrying about them. So basically, imagine you're going back to 2015 and people are saying, you do you, boo-boo, I'll do me, that kind of thing. And I think the idea of let them and the soundbite it creates, really, it got so popular because I think Mel Robbins really hit a sore spot in the zeitgeist, or like a spot that really needs scratching to a lot of the public. And I think that's more by accident than intentional, but nonetheless, it's working. So again, going to the idea of forgetting certain people. Goodbye, you gotta let them just be who they want to be, and you'll be who you want to be, do, and don't meddle. I think, for me at least, starting in 2022, there was a lot of conversations about why no one has any close friends anymore. Why is there's no such thing as a core friend group? Why do people ghost one another constantly? Dating apps took a massive tumble in usage because no one meets up on them anymore, which is kind of the point. And I definitely felt this hugely. So for about 2 to 3 years, for the entirety of COVID, people were shut up and alone, not meeting people. And in that time, many people's lives changed. People moved to other states, opted to work remotely permanently, started families, got divorced, so on. People lost their jobs and had to maybe make career fields to something that didn't lend for as much free time. So faster than usual, people's social situations changed and they were forced to be very different than who others knew them as. And by the time, people could see each other again, it's like you're getting to know an entirely different person who you don't jive with. And I think this caused a lot of social confusion. Then there's the whole debate about third spaces and what it means to socialize purely online versus having a physical space. Life changed, well, for the worse, to no fault of anyone's own, and people just, to survive, had to drop a lot of friends. In situations, maybe you have to work multiple jobs to get out of debt or something like that. Okay, I'm just gonna go a little personal here. The city I live in lost 50,000 residents during COVID, and the job market was so screwed. There were layoffs, but people also they got pickier with where they wanted to work if they had to return to office, and I understand that. In 2022 at my job, there were 3 people who quit on their first day in the span of 3 months because they're just like, yeah, this place sucks, I can find better, or I would rather just not work than have to work somewhere bad, which was annoying for me, but okay, I understand. So I think the idea of let them just rang to so many people because they had to accept letting go of life as they knew it and the people as they knew it, and had to learn to not afford to care about other people like they used to, just out of a lot of complicated circumstances because of the fallout of COVID. Okay, so now let's go into the book. Wow, it was so bad. Wow, it was really bad. There's other content creators pointed out that there was a scandal, one, that Mel plagiarized something, and that also her daughter is a co-author but isn't credited as a co-author on the cover. In the dedication and in the book, Mel says, oh, I wrote this with my daughter. So even making it weirder why her daughter's name isn't on the cover of the book as an author, but that there's a whole conversation to be had about there. And a lot of other reviews I watched on YouTube pointed out how this book is very repetitive. I cannot stress that enough. This book is so damn repetitive. The same things are basically said every single chapter upon chapter upon chapter upon chapter, just a bunch of different ways. It reminds me of, maybe in high school or college, university, whatever, how when you have a thesis and you don't know how to make it hit the page count, so you kind of find the longest way of saying something to get the page count. That's what this book was, and it doesn't do that super well. It's really sad because Mel is an okay writer this is the only book I've read from hers, but she's an okay writer because the book started off actually quite engaging. And then the problem is because she keeps re-saying the same thing but doesn't want to say it verbatim like she said it before. She had to find more creative ways of saying something, which lended to then some pretty bad sentence structure because she ran out of just grammatically correct ways to say things or just stylistically coherent ways of making her the same point she made before. So it started off okay, the book, I mean, just on like a purely writing stylistic level, and then just fell apart very quickly because when you don't have enough, that kind of thing happens. I just was like, wow, this is just so bad. I got the audiobook specifically because I don't have like a lot of quotes because I'm listening to it, but I did the audiobook because if I'm reading like a book in text that I don't like, I'll have the habit of skimming, and then I might skip over something, and I didn't want to risk doing that with this book. So the audiobook came to 10 hours, so it took me an entire day and a bit to get through it. And I'm glad I did that because I did pick up on a lot of things I'm sure I would have like not paid much attention to because, you know, I get distracted easily. But wow, this book was really painful to listen to. At times I really like was so tempted just to flip to something else on my Audible app to like palate cleanser. I'm like, oh come on, just give me an hour of something good before going back. But I'm like, no, stick with it because I had other stuff to do. This book, it basically makes for a good leading point from like a TikTok or something, but it doesn't offer more than what a TikTok could. In fact, I think the TikTok would have been much better, but okay. I'll start with the very beginning. So she goes into actually where she got the idea for Let Them. Her idea came from, a story about her son going to prom, and she goes into a long story about her son's prom preparations, or lack thereof, because he doesn't really do a good job preparing for it. And she's freaking out and be like, oh my god, no, you're doing this wrong. And then she's like, okay, I shouldn't meddle. My son wants to do it this way. Let him go to prom in all the chaos and bad planning. Which I found this story very weird. I'm like, okay, because the whole point of what the book's trying to teach you doesn't really align up with the story about her son going to prom very well. Like, okay, she's concerned and all, but why would she be overly crazy concerned? Because she was comparing her son to her daughters who were really meticulous about prom, and it seemed very odd that she really was like, why isn't my son caring more about this when he just basically, it seems like he was just very open about, you know, just wanting to go very casually and just be there and not really be invested in it. And then, like, right after that story, then I think we get into the real reason why she actually came up with this whole Let Them thing. Because then she talks about losing friends. And this is what I actually said earlier about, you know, why Let Them resonate with so many people, because the social part of it. And I think then she talked about losing friends is hard, you know. I had to let myself learn how to let them be who they are and not care, even if they don't care about me anymore. And she talked about seeing some Instagram post of people she used to be friends with all on vacation together and she wasn't invited. And I'm like, so that's the real reason why this whole thing came into existence. Not your son. You used that as a cover story. I was like, you see that you just like grasped at straws. You're like, oh no, it was something more wholesome and family related, not me just being extremely petty. Like, ha 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 ha. No, not fooling me there. I was like, okay, and so she's just got very butthurt about not being popular, even though she's a middle-aged woman with grown kids. Wow, that shows about her level of maturity. So that led her to doing like I don't know if it was an Instagram reel or TikTok about, you know, learning to let them be who they are and, you know, not really care about why people might be not very nice to you, and learning to move on from people who you once cared about. And apparently that reel or Instagram did very well, and I guess that launched a whole new level of her motivational speaking career. Okay, so that's where it started. And overall, the book, it's just a bunch of like, you go girl, you got this kind of stuff. You know, you can do it, and life is hard, I get it, things suck, but you can manage it. Okay, nothing new really. Here's a really amazing revelation that came from her. She says, your reactions are automatic. Oh my god, don't worry, I'm not going to insert that Miranda Priestley groundbreaking meme, don't worry. And then, that's the thing, her examples of like, oh, see how let them change my life and made it so much better when I applied it, I'm like, no, this is like cringy. It's one of those things where like, that doesn't mean what you think it is. For example, she gives a story about a guy behind her coughing very hard on a plane. And then she said, please cover your mouth, and he didn't, so he was coughing, and she's just like, well, you know what? I let him, and it didn't bother me anymore. And I'm like, ew, no, 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 no. Because what if he had COVID? No, instead she's like, look, I was more powerful than him because of my willpower to not care. I let him, see? I'm like, no, get a stewardess to stop him. That's really harmful. So, and a lot of the examples she gives, I'm like, that's not a good thing. It's just very interesting that like this book of Let Them is about taking back your power, and I've just never read anything more about being powerless. For example, she gives an example about being stressed and underappreciated at work, just like in general. And if you don't get a promotion or raise you deserve, you have to just let it be unfair and do nothing because you're responsible for your career, is what her reasoning is. Like, no, Mel. You know, yes, an employee is responsible for their career, but so is the boss. That's why they're the boss, and that has to be addressed with them. And I get, you know, in a toxic work environment, you know, such positive changes are very difficult, but that's still no excuse to just, you know, sit back and just be like, well, let it happen. Okay, I'll be fine, kind of thing. I'm like, again, Let Them's all about, you know, really taking control of your life. And I'm like, how is just sitting idly by taking control? It's just so weird. So you see what I mean? And Let Them overall is a very ill-defined concept. And I'll go into why and how I think she cheats with it. Another example she gives of Let Them is, I guess there was an issue with a hiking trail by her house where people weren't picking up after their dogs. And I guess there was like some thread about that park banning dogs or something, and she saw a woman not pick up after her dog. The woman just put leaves over the dog. And she's like, I just let her do it, see? Because I knew she wouldn't listen to me. I'm like, so what's the point? Why stress myself out creating an argument when I just let it happen? And I'm like, okay, so either you don't really care about the park being allowed to have dogs, or you're just afraid of confrontation, or you're just being lazy. And in general, what I understood putting leaves over a dog's leftovers to mean is that you don't have a bag on you, you'll come back and you'll pick it up when you get a bag. Mel could have also offered her a bag, or I hate to say, pick up it herself. I mean, no one should have to do that, but I mean, for the sake of saving the park. And like, there's a million other things you could have done that I think would have still been worth the effort without overstressing you or creating something, rather than just, I did nothing, I'm so proud of myself, look at me, I pat myself on the back for doing literally nothing. Like, okay. Part of me gets what Mel is saying a little bit. Like, for example, my train commute to work. Sometimes there's like a drug addict or like some crazy person on the train who just wants to do something to annoy the passengers. And engaging with that person is not going to result in anything good because you're just giving them what they want, and they're just it could escalate to something dangerous. So whatever they're doing, like often it's like blasting music out loud. You just kind of gotta like accept it or move cars. But that's the only example I can really think of. The others Mel gives, I'm like, I don't think that was the best way of handling things. Also, that's the thing. If Let Them is just about, I hate saying Let Them, like, it's just such a bad, to me it just doesn't have marketability, it just comes off. I can actually kind of see for like, as like a slogan for TikTok, like saying like demure or girl dinner or girl math or whatever, something like that. I can kind of see kind of fitting in there, but just talking about it at length, it just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't hit well. But anyway, so I can see, like, if Let Them is all about letting things happen and not trying to meddle and just moving on past it as it's happening and not letting it interfere with you, then it kind of gives permission for Mel Robbins to just write about any bad thing that's happened to her and just be like, see, I let them. So just she has an infinite number of things to fill up a book. And that's kind of what this book is. It's just filler of just random bad things that happened to her and be like, see, I let them. Look at that. Look how amazing I am. And it's like, kind of just feels like you were just you just found something that enabled you to fill up a book with anything without having to put much thought into it. Like, this is supposed to be a self-help book, and the line between self-help book and memoirs gets blurry, but it like swings into memoir fully, like pretty much always. There's supposed to be like, the beginning sets up like, I'm presenting you so much research, scientific research. I counted 4 scientists or academics mentioned in passing who are friends of Mel's who said something offhandedly, and that's about it. So then the book goes into Mel Robbins and the origin of her speaking career. She touches upon this many times. She's not super biographical about her early years as a professional, but this is touched upon a few times where she and her husband had a failing business and it caused a lot of stress. So she started like a speaking career basically as a way to make money. I just find this so ironic that she was lecturing, getting paid to lecture on success, and yet she was like drowning in debt and almost lost her home. I just find that funny, but that's actually happened quite a bit. That also was the case with another motivational speaker, Jen Sincero, who to me is more like your kooky aunt who you kind of grit and smile at like Thanksgiving. At least Mel Robbins is your more cooler aunt, I guess. And then she goes into like a speech about how accepting reality instead of working against it is better, but isn't letting yourself move past whatever reality you're in, isn't that like a something? Isn't that kind of like fixing it in a way? Like, what? That's the thing. There's like different kinds of let them she doesn't acknowledge. There's let them don't do anything, and then there's let them do something, but act like you're not doing anything. It's so complicated. And again, I said earlier how these self-help gurus tend to present issues, the worst issues, as if they're not that terrible, so not acknowledge the worst of the worst that can happen to people. Another example, again, she talked about like anxiety marrying her husband, and like the biggest issue was, oh, she's a Midwesterner, he's an East Coaster, oh, where are they gonna live and which in-laws will they be closer to? I'm like, wow, okay, yes, that's so complicated and hard when it comes to marrying someone. Wow. There's, by the way, a lot of long tangents about toxic families that she applies let them to, and to me it just sounds like she's talking about a lot of estrangement that she knows happened around her, or possibly in her own family, that she won't outright say happened. Like, again, the anecdotes that she say apply to her let them theory are just so random. It seems like she's just advocating for not confronting any problems with someone or resolving anything. And like, not all the world can work that way. Sometimes you have to have clashes. That happens. Like, this book swings from like very positive to like, yeah, you got it, to like very depressing stuff to like back and forth very positive so quickly. It like gives me whiplash. Another example is she said, let them can apply to when like a kid throws a tantrum at a toy store, and it's not good to like be mean or yell and scream at them. You have to help them through the process of their feelings. And she admits that she did one time, her kids did this, and she got a little heated and yelled at them, and she admitted that she shouldn't have done that, which, okay, good for her admitting that. I think that's relatable to a lot of parents. But then later on that same story, she says the problem just fixed itself because she gave the kid the silent treatment. So I'm like, how is that helping the kid process their feelings about, not getting the toy, the whatever? Let them gets applied to so many things it really shouldn't. So all sorts of dysfunction she describes with people she knows is just like accepted as like norm, and you should be happy to live with it. Like, some interventions into chaos need to happen, otherwise someone's gonna end up the scapegoat for all the problems and issues get swept under the rug. Also, a lot of the times when talking about how to solve issues, she can't really stick to what her let them theory is, and she just goes into just generally having good habits. So let them just gets dropped a lot of the times. And then there's this whole segment where she bungles talking about once getting someone writing into her for advice about a groom wanting to call off the wedding. And Mel said this groom was afraid of not knowing how to handle his emotions. I don't know what Mel wrote back to him at all, and Mel said she didn't follow up. I think the whole let them problem in this like crisis that she learned about from a fan, I think the problem is it stops the conversation short. Like, if the groom's not feeling good about the upcoming marriage, then I think the bride also likely knows something is up. What changed about his feelings? What caused him doubts? And I think the lesson isn't to deny your emotions or to just be like, okay, well, people are going to be mad. I think it would be learning how to explain what he feels to everyone else so they'll understand, even if, cries and tears will happen no matter what. Because if the groom's feeling doubts about the marriage, there are no invalid reasons for this. Like sometimes in general with this book, I just sometimes think the Nicki Minaj quote, "You gotta hold your peace," I probably got that wrong, is just much more applicable. And then this really pissed me off. She says, when getting jealous about other people who have more privilege, naturally more beautiful, more money, whatever, you have to accept and just let them have it and then work towards it. Focus on working to gain those privileges that you can earn. Which, okay, yeah, I understand what she's saying, but also being too okay with it leads to some serious problems. I want to bring up actually the scandal Varsity Blues, the one where a lot of wealthy parents and celebrities were bribing their kids into like really good colleges despite not having the merit for it. You're going to say just let that happen? No. Then she goes, this actually really upset me. She goes into a scary story about her two daughters and one being jealous of the other because the other was just more conventionally attractive. It just had more admirable talents, and just said the other daughter let herself be beat up by the sister's natural privileges. And Mel's like, oh God, my daughter, she just ruined so many years of her life just being miserable and focusing on her sister, not herself. I'm like, where were you as a parent consoling and making your daughter feel better? What did you do? Like, that is such a failure as a mother to just be like, deal with it. Oh my God, that really upset me. And there's a lot of passages where I'm just like, Mel was clearly a horrible parent. And like, I really think Mel is someone who isn't capable of having any deep conversations. Because like going to the example I just gave about her daughters, she didn't bother to look into the psychology of self-esteem issues, sibling rivalry. Like, and that's an issue with all these other self-help gurus. They just believe all problems are solvable of like superficial sayings, despite her, having so many high-regarded academic friends. This is an actual quote from the book. Being happier requires you to allow yourself to be happier. She actually said that verbatim. Here's another big revelation. Something bothering you will be by someone you know. Wow. Like, again, Mel, she doesn't really bother to like think of good examples for her let them theory to apply. It's just whatever bad things are happening, okay, there you go. Let it be. It's happening. And you knowing it's happening and not doing anything is her let them theory, which will automatically make you better. She gives the example of a friend who is a professional interior designer, and then some other person these people know got into interior design, but not really, just more showing off the design of their home, and gained a big following on social media. And the friend got very jealous because it's like, no, I'm the professional designer. I can't believe this friend is like getting all sorts of recognition for her taste when she's not even a professional designer, and she didn't even design her own home. And Mel is like, well, you have to let her have that and then focus on what you can do yourself to improve, up your social media game. Which, okay, maybe that is a lesson in, how to maybe expand your business more and what it can do for you, social media. But also, there's a lot more to analyze. One, having a talent that can be shown off via social media is very different than having a talent in the business of that creative field. Like someone who can put together some furniture in a room and make a TikTok of it or whatever is very different than someone who can talk with clients, get their vision of what they want their home to look like, be able to then scout out all the proper things, put together drafts of it, draw something on AutoCAD, all that other stuff that requires to be a professional interior designer. Some people are better at working behind the scenes, and it makes for a much more sustainable business model. There was nothing also about that other person getting famous for interior design online indicating that that person wanted some kind of business or to become professional, so it really doesn't even apply. The comparison is very mute. Again, Mel will just grab for any terrible thing and just say, okay, there, the let them theory applies. Look, there you go, it's in this book now. And again, this was touched upon before, but this is brought up quite a few times in the book. She goes into a story about how she was in very serious debt around the time, I think, in the early years of her marriage. Her husband had a failing restaurant business. It kind of, I don't really know exactly what it was. Maybe it was an outright restaurant. And they couldn't afford their dream home while a friend of hers got their dream home. And Mel says it was her fault for getting jealous of that friend, and she learned this in couples therapy with her husband because their marriage was in trouble because of the debt her husband was in. I'm like, no, that's your husband's fault. You know, you should have your dream home or be able to have the means of it. As your husband's fault, you can't. Like, you have every right to be jealous, I think. You know, or if not jealous, be upset that somebody else you know is getting it when you could have but didn't because your husband messed up with his business. And then she also says, oh, and the let them theory also helps people reconnect with old friends. And again, friendship and adulthood are brought up so many times. And it just has me convinced that Mel Robbins formed this whole let them thing as a way to cope with the fact that no one wants to be friends with her. But anyway, and that's the thing. She's like, oh, it helps you reconnect with old friends. Like, how? By your own logic, let them is just letting people go and not being friends with them. There's let them go ahead and do it. Let them do nothing. Which is it? It alternates, and I don't really know which is which. So that's the thing. The first half of the book was about like more how let them applies to family conflicts. The second is on friendships and adulthood. There are 3 consecutive chapters completely devoted to like adult friendships, to a point that's very obsessive. And the writing actually picks up in qualities at this time because she's writes more coherently with more enthusiasm. I just think Mel is just a very jealous, petty person. Like, there's so many times of like adult friendships falling apart that it's really just Mel thinks it's perfectly okay for like adults to behave like teenagers. And she quotes an academic she knows who says, adults are just 8-year-olds in grown-up bodies, which, and she's like, see? I'm like, I think that person was telling you that as a joke, but you took it seriously, Mel. Also, going back to the troubled time with her husband, she said her husband was in devastating depression, and I assume that's because of the failed restaurant business, but I don't know. Again, that period of time was a real point of contention for her and her husband, and I get what actually went down, I don't really know. Mel herself is really bad at managing mental health. Oh, this part I gotta put a trigger warning for. I'm really sorry. Trigger warning for possible essay. You'll see what I mean. This part really, 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 really angered me, actually. Mel said that around middle school, her daughter had horrible anxiety. Why was never specified. And her daughter wanted to sleep in Mel's bed. And Mel tried to coax her daughter out of doing it, but it didn't work. So Mel ended up creating this like small bed by her bed, at the foot of her bed. Her husband hated it. I have no idea why any of this happened. As she was describing the story, I thought maybe the anxiety was like school related or something, but then Mel said that her daughter was really scared to sleep in her own room. And it's never said why, but I wonder if someone was maybe coming in at night into her daughter's room. I don't know what the sleeping situation in that household was at the time. I kind of assume everyone had their own room. And then Mel says her anxiety kept getting worse. And Mel said that because her daughter was so afraid to sleep in her own room, Mel said, oh, I enabled this by letting her sleep in my bed. And Mel says, I enabled my daughter's impulse to run away from her life. Which is such a gross way of talking about your daughter's mental health. I'm sorry, that's really bad. She said at one point, Mel and her husband were on vacation and they had to fly home from vacation because her daughter had a really bad panic attack. That the babysitter called her and said, your daughter is really having trouble. And again, the fact that this happened when her parents were away furthers my suspicion that something was going on that would indicate, again, the daughter was, well, you know what's going on. I don't need to say that. And again, Mel writes about this so insensitively and doesn't give details. She said that her daughter had the strength and ability and power to work through an anxiety and fears. And okay, credit Mel and her husband to take the girl to see a therapist. Mel says in therapy sessions that she had the revelation that the only way to get stronger was to face what she needed to face. I don't know what that means, because I don't know what the situation was or if the reason why her daughter was so afraid was ever discovered. I actually do think that, well, Mel did say that this anxiety lasted a very long time. She said upwards of 10 years. So her daughter from middle school to possibly adulthood, I think her daughter was afraid to tell her parents what was actually going on. Again, Mel writes about things so passively. She says, it was normal for her daughter to wake up in the middle of the night feeling so anxious that she couldn't sleep. No, it is not. No. why does she think that? Wow, I'm sorry, she was a bad mom. Like, I cannot believe she would have the audacity to put that in this book. Again, I said, Mel referenced the bad financial situation many times. At one point she said she was like $800,000 in debt. Her husband's business couldn't pay its employees. They could barely afford gas in the tank. Let them sometimes just seems to be a scapegoat for delusional optimism. She says, okay, her husband asked his brother for a loan. The brother said no. And Mel said, you know what? It was a good thing he didn't, because it would have just enabled my husband's bad habits and prolonged the bad financial situation longer, because being denied the loan meant that her husband had to admit that he had to walk away from the business because he couldn't keep it going anymore. Okay, yes, but also that's really terrible of the brother, because the brother, if he's able to and knows that they have kids that are in need, why would he not do it for the kids? Like, that's terrible. His nieces and nephews. So, but Mel doesn't, okay, I mean, look, no, the brother was not obligated to give the money, but Mel just seems to want to assign a good attribute to the brother, which I don't think he necessarily deserved that. And honestly, I think a lot more happened than just the money. Just Mel, when talking about relationships, is just really bad about it, because, for example, she just doesn't seem to know what makes a healthy relationship. She talks about, like, a couple she knows, the wife is into fitness and keeps healthy, the husband isn't. And she says, oh, the wife has to work harder to accept the husband is who he is and make the relationship work, because she's the one that wanted him to change, he wouldn't, and she had to work to accept that wouldn't happen, that she still wanted the relationship. I think a lot of sexism was at play there, because women are expected to keep more in better condition than men, and Mel doesn't seem to see that. You see, the book just is so terrible on so many levels. It doesn't even accomplish the goal it sets out to do. So, I don't know, Mel just needed to write a book just to be able to sell something for her new wave of fame. Yeah, it was bad. I suffered through this. She's a bad mom.